Hi, this is Paul Tyler, and welcome to another episode of the Reimagine podcast. Laura, how are you?
I am doing well today, Paul. It's nice to be back.
It is, and I guess we've got a really interesting show, and it's one that where yes, it's about innovation. It's also about our sort of core annuity business, and I think we're going to have a kind of interesting conversation today that may meander from innovation to implementation to future of technology for mainline insurance companies, especially in the retirement or Medicare space, anywhere where you actually need the agents just to complete a sale. So, Laura, do you want to do the introductions?
Absolutely. Joining us today, we have Robby Allen. He is the VP of Sales at AgentSync, and his story is one that's quite interesting. And as Paul mentioned, it's going to take a lot of twists and turns, but we think it'll be very good content for you to enjoy. So, Robby, with that, tell us a little bit about yourself personally, and then jump into the AgentSync story.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. And thanks, Paul and Laura, for having me. A fan of the show, have listened to a handful of the episodes and have really enjoyed getting to know you guys kind of through the listening lens before being asked to be a guest. So thanks for having me. I guess a little context on me. So my background is primarily working for kind of high growth software businesses in Silicon Valley. I made my way into insurance via an insurtech business. And that insurtech business was a company called Zenefits. I joined that company back in 2014 as one of the first 50 employees. And I didn't anticipate how much growth we were going to experience as a company. So Zenefits, for the folks who are listening who haven't heard of it, was basically a brokerage model where they were distributing health, dental, and vision benefits to small businesses across the country. And the value proposition was basically Zenefits had this really robust technology platform that could handle a lot of the back office administrative functions that are done manually for small businesses. Things like payroll and PTO tracking and onboarding and offboarding and benefits. And so Zenefits grew from about 0 to 2,000 brokers inside of the business in really like a year and a half. I had a team of about 250 people that I oversaw there. And what ended up happening was Zenefits grew from just distributing products in California to all 50 states overnight. And we see this with insurtech businesses today that take in these big rounds of funding and have this big growth imperative. The challenge for Zenefits was that they really failed to appreciate the complexity of state regulatory requirements. And so at one point in time, the company was staring down the barrel of $30 million in licensing fines and violations from various state DOIs. Kind of faced with this existential crisis, our head of sales operations, Niji, at Zenefits was tapped by the CEO at the time, Parker Conrad, to get his arms around the problem and find a solution. We did a lot of market analysis and looked at the products that existed to handle licensing at scale. And most of the solutions were legacy solutions that had been built a really long time ago and sort of sat on the shelf. So we decided to build something in-house. So we actually built the product initially on our internal Salesforce instance. Salesforce has this developer portal where you can build products for yourselves on it. And Niji built this solution, did the roadshow to go, kind of make peace with the different DOIs, and actually ended up giving away this product, which we called Licensing Plus, for free on the Salesforce App Exchange, really as a peace offering to the media. And over 100 companies ended up downloading that Licensing Plus product within a few days of it launching. And that was kind of this aha moment of we're not the only ones experiencing this problem. Niji gets Zenefits through this crisis and actually ends up negotiating the intellectual property of this Licensing Plus product and start to work on it nights and weekends with his co-founder, who also happens to be his wife, Jen Knight. They start AgentSync about a year later and work on it for years and years and years to kind of build a product that was going to solve, the use case for the smallest agencies in the country and also the use case for the biggest carriers in the country. So a lot of surface area of complexity there. Niji and I got back in touch. We never really fell out of touch, but I came on board as the 12th employee of the company about 2 years ago. Since then, we've raised over $100 million in funding. We're now the only privately held company valued over $1 billion that is building software exclusively to support insurance companies. We've got over 200 customers roughly and about 150 employees now. And it's fun because AgentSync is now sort of the silver lining of what kind of came to be a challenging end to the Zenefit story. And what we're doing is we're building really kind of an end-to-end producer management platform that includes how you handle compliance for all insurance companies in the country. So the biggest carriers to the smallest agencies and everything in between. So, I like to say that, we kind of got in trouble at Zenefits and built the solution so that other folks don't have to. And here we are today, now doing this for the whole industry.
Oh, thanks, Robby. And as I said, people listening, there are going to be a lot of layers to this conversation. So, and you asked us before, who are our listeners? And our listeners, as Laura told you, are corporate innovation people. We've also got carriers, people who are line officers in companies looking at problems like you're describing, and also investors. So I think just to sort of step back and say, there are also a lot of armchair observers of startups who are, it won't work, it does work, they shut up, and then something happens, they're like, oh, I told you, it was a complete failure. Now, what I find interesting in the story here is that success actually came from failure, right? Is that kind of like a coda here that I'm hearing in terms of AgentSync and your trajectory?
I think that's a fair way to put it. Yeah, the success coming from failure. There's a lot of analogies you like to use, and if you stand around the sales corner of the AgentSync office, you'll hear me rattle off 5 or 10 different ones a day, like a phoenix coming up from the ashes, right? With the
yes,
saga.
We know that. We can tell you that.
I think the lessons, there were a lot of lessons learned from that Zenefits experience. And I think one of the biggest ones for us was how complex this industry and really just this process of producer management and credentialing and licensing and compliance is. Because you're talking about 50 unique governing bodies in all 50 state DOIs that all have different rules that all need to be accommodated, whether that's, a fingerprint in Massachusetts or whatever kind of quirk that state introduces. And what we saw was an opportunity for software to wrap its arms around a ton of industry complexity to just give that time back to businesses where, like whether it's Nassau or whether it's, a small brokerage that's focused on, distributing health insurance. At the end of the day, like the secret sauce is about the products, the delivery, and the value of customers. The secret sauce of insurance companies is not about how you handle producer onboarding and compliance. That's a great problem for software to solve. And so I think that was where we failed to solve that problem effectively using our own manual processes at Zenefits. And we came to understand that most other folks are managing this process on spreadsheets.
Right.
In the brains of people that have been doing it for 20 plus years. And that's a really challenging way to scale over time, and obviously the repercussions are pretty steep. So I think you're right that yes, this has been something that we've learned from failure.
Yeah, and just to be fair, too, failure is a funny term, right? Like, I think we want everybody tends to view politicians or businesses as cardboard cutouts, and it's either this or it's that, and whatever happens. I mean, Zenefit's got a lot of things right. I'm asking this question from a perspective of startups that we've been supporting. Robby, it's if and we'll kind of I'll use this as a question that I know Laura's going to follow up more. But like if you're involved in a successful startup, how many things do you need to worry about? To keep the cash, the payroll going, the customers happy, and the investors continuing to fund your company. What does it feel like?
It's a seemingly endless number of things, right? Where you're in a startup environment, you're resource constrained, and so you can only do so many things because of the number of people that you have available. So it's sort of an exercise in prioritization. What is the highest value thing we can do at any given moment in time? And the nice thing for us is that, we kind of got this head start where we got to really understand the market, the insurance market, and the needs of the insurance market while we were at Zenefits building this solution. And so for years and years and years, we were having customer conversations and iterating to the point where the first 10 customers we actually brought on at AgentSync were enterprise, like large, household name insurance companies. And that's pretty rare for a startup to bring its first 10 customers on board that are large enterprises. But to your point, Paul, it is a resource constraint thing, but it can be done. I mean, you look at, Parker and the Zenefits saga. Parker goes back and founds another company immediately after called Rippling, and Rippling's now twice as big as Zenefits ever was, solving a similar but bigger scope of the problem. And so I think at the end of the day, the lesson there is the market decides. And so if you're solving a problem that really needs solving and the market has an appetite for that, the market will pull you, and the resources will follow. And that's been a similar experience to what we've had here at AgentSync, is being pulled into some of the most strategic and even complex insurance companies in the world because there's such an appetite or pain around this problem that we solve. And you have to just stay focused on the customers, I think, is kind of the lesson I've learned again and again.
Yeah, Laura, tell people how did we find Robby, and how did we find AgentSync?
Yeah, so it's actually through a series of research that we did for the Retire Tech map. So those of you who haven't seen this yet, imagine.nfg.com, you'll find the Retire Tech map on there. But really what we wanted to do was dive in and get an understanding of startups and scale-ups that are out there, really kind of working to, rewire the industry, as we put it. So whether it's, savings for millennials, customer creation for advisors, or planning tools for boomers, just to name some, we wanted to look at the startups and scale-ups, the people who are doing smart work within the retirement space, to really kind of wrap our heads around, what can be, who is doing that, and then having these conversations to learn more about the products and services that really they're offering out into the market. That's how we found him.
Yeah, and Robby, our secret mission, not so secret, was to find companies that we might actually bring benefits to our own company. So I'll tell you our story, which is, semi-startup, semi-not, because, we've NASA acquired some literally, Phoenix Insurance Company rising, from the ashes. So it's your term was very apropos for the work we've been doing. We ourselves launched a pretty novel way to sell annuities through agents, selling through digital platform, marketing at scale, annuities at scale. Challenge we hit was everybody want to sell our annuities. How do you get them licensed? How do you know that they're licensed? I personally experienced this myself. I had to get licensed as an agent to be able to engage with customers, just from almost a market research point of view. Robby, I need to get licensed in 47 states, Laura. How do I do it? What's the status? Am I still? Is it 47 today, or is it 46? And am I talking to somebody in a state that I really shouldn't be talking to? So Robby, we ran into that problem, ourselves, and said, okay, real nice fit. And maybe you could talk about sort of what your experience was, establishing a relationship with our company. We can certainly fill in kind of the back end of this. And I think this will be most interesting for companies, startups trying to sell into companies, and also startups trying to figure out internal innovation leaders. How do you get a startup actually connected with somebody inside your in a line management in a company?
Yeah, it's a great question. Unfortunately, there isn't a Laura at every single insurance company out there. If there was, that would certainly make our jobs easier. Folks that are actively hunting for innovative solutions for their business to try to pull things forward. It's amazing seeing folks like NASA pushing resources in that direction. It says a lot about the company and the vision you guys have. Selling to older industries like insurance, and I'm going to kind of bucket all companies, and obviously there's a spectrum here of innovation, but it's hard. It's hard bringing new solutions to old markets. There's a resistance to change that's just natural in organizations to begin with, sort of a leaning towards the status quo. And in addition to that, it's a highly regulated industry where there's a lot of process that's intentionally put in place to scrutinize new process and new software from being sort of implemented into the business. So how do you get around that? How do you work through that? The way that we think about that is kind of I would say it's sort of a twofold approach to simplify what I would sort of call our sales process. The first thing is really finding company fit. And so when I say company fit, we can serve every insurance company in this industry because every insurance company has some type of requirement, whether it's a brokerage focused on licensing, their brokers, whether it's a carrier focused on validating that licensure and then appointing brokers to sell their products, or whether it's an intermediary like an MGA or a wholesaler that needs to validate that both those things are happening on either side, but maybe isn't directly responsible for the actual transactions that are going on. But selling to everybody all at once is a bad strategy, right? You need to focus on how are you going to win? And the way that we do that is we look for company fit. And company fit typically is growing, fast growing companies that are bringing new products to market or moving into new states or just introducing some new amount of complexity into their business that will need supporting. And Paul, you said it best. You guys can't get people licensed fast enough to sell all of these products that you're bringing to market. The next thing to do is find the right champion within those companies. So that's somebody who has direct responsibility for typically some type of revenue growth initiative. We've found that, compliance matters, revenue matters more. And those two things are actually tied hand in hand, really closely. When you think about the fact that 70% of insurance policies across this country today are still written by a broker and not written by, a software script in an app, that kind of tells you everything you need to know that the majority of distribution of insurance in this country still continues to come from brokers. And every insurance company needs a plan for how they're going to enable those brokers to sell, sort of speed of ready to sell when somebody raises their hand. That's what AgentSync solves. We help companies get speed to sell a lot faster. And it's been fun to get to know the Nassau group because you guys are really innovative, and there's folks like Laura and yourself, Paul, that work there and that are thinking on the cutting edge and doing things like this podcast to bring light to some of the new ways of considering insurance. So it's a combination of right company fit and right champion, and then a whole lot of hard work, to kind of work through the process. And I'd actually love to ask you guys, being on the inside, you're having to go advocate for a new way of doing something in a company that, while it is a more innovative and sort of insurtech focused business, there's still some amount of friction there. Talk about working through the internal process, because there's an element of we have to enable our customers to sell internally. I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I'll start this. Laura, I'm going to have you sort of talk through the process. So immediately, two problems I saw your team could solve. One was on our annuity side. For those people who don't know annuities, there are a lot of different types of annuities. Some of them look an awful lot like bank CDs, but we can't say they're bank CDs or we get in trouble with our compliance department, so we're not marketing it. But they're like short-term savings vehicles, simple to explain, but exceptionally rate sensitive. So if you run a rate special, you'll get a lot of agents come in and wanting to sell your stuff at once. How do you do this? And operationally, Robby, big challenge, right? Because if you put all your resources over here on this, supporting this particular product, what happens to all your other product lines at the same time? Other people who need help want to get licensed. So by the way, they have customers they want to sell a product to, and you create a lot of dissatisfaction with these agents if, it takes them, you run a special for a month, but it takes them 6 weeks to get licensed. Something won't work here. The other challenge is, one particular product line we're in, which is MedSup. And for those of you who don't know Medicare supplement insurance, it's almost like it feels like you're doing tax planning at H&R Block. Get lots and lots of ads start, running on television in October through the end of or middle of November, and it is just like the business goes crazy. And if you're on a call center, you got to license people up. The carrier's got to license them up, and then by the way, you turn them off in January because sales stop. What do you do? How do you scale up here? So Laura, what happened? By the way, for everybody listening, this story does have a happy ending.
They usually do. So it's different, right? You talked about having that internal champion. So once we did the research and we identified AgentSync, we had to bring it to someone, right? So change is hard. Change is a behavior, and sometimes it pays to take a step back and understand who it is within the company that we're going to be selling this concept to, if you will. So when we go to somebody with a change behavior, we have to arm ourselves with the information of what is the problem it will solve? How quickly do we think it could potentially happen? What are the internal and external roadblocks that may be standing in front of us? What are some things that we might not be able to see that history has taught us? Very much like we rose from the ashes as the phoenix. So it's identifying the internal team, identifying external pieces that will have some impact, and really it's going to the individual with that solution or solution that we're hoping for, and identifying the changes that are going to take place. Having the realistic conversation, this is something that is going to do A, B, and C for us. Whereas, it might be hard because this group of internal employees may not like to face change. We at NASA, we're lucky. Change is part of the culture here. It's kind of ingrained into the individuals who choose to work within the company itself. So we find champions within our chief people officer, within our chief growth officer, also, in the sales area. So for us, every time we have one of these behavioral change conversations about a startup or scale up that's going to come in and potentially, solve for a problem that NASA may have, it's fun, it's exciting, and it's a lot of freaking work, like you said, right? It's working with the people for the product or the problem to find a solution that really does work.
Yeah, I'd break it down. Yeah, Laura did a good kind of high level overview. I think the introduction is everything. First of all, you can't introduce a lot of companies, because I hear this from our peers, is that, and I hear it from people on the receiving end saying, "Oh my God, here come the innovation people bringing me the 50th startup to look at. Stop! I've got a day job." So there is capacity. There's a mental and true time constraint that you've got to sort of understand with your audience. Robby, and you've been there with these startups, especially if you're especially if you're in a company that's growing quickly. It means probably the company you're selling into is understaffed, probably stressed, probably focused on shorter term objectives than longer term. How do you get them to think a little longer term? So, I look at it as I may have 3 hours. I don't tell these people 3 hours of their time a quarter or every 6 months, and I better use that time judiciously. So I can't send them a lot. I've got to do my own screen, and I think number two is not to be presumptuous that I know the problem. Now I happen to have personal pain with this problem myself, so and that helped validate in my mind. You have a solution that works. But then who do you introduce them to in the organization? Because the higher up you go, the more open people in an organization may be to looking at doing things differently. However, the farther down the organization, the closer to where the work takes place, is somebody who will actually take that idea, listen, work through all those technical details, Robby, and run take the contract to completion, put it in place. So now, the person who's doing that may feel like, wait a second, you're going to disemploy how many people from my unit? I had a unit of 8 people. Now I'm going to be down to 5. Maybe it works okay. Maybe I'm okay. I got a bonus, right? I mean, so if you get to that, Robby, tell us how do you think through this? And I'll sort of, we'll take you through how it went in our organization. Who's the person you knock on the door the first? The person running the licensing, or is it the person who's responsible for ops or sales?
Yeah, great question. So we, what you're describing, Paul, is a perfect kind of summary of what we like to call team selling. We don't see sales or the customer journey as an individual sport. This isn't swimming, it's not golf, it's football, it's basketball. It's a team element where there's a lot of different roles on both sides, our side and the customer side, that need to be employed to get everybody rallied around this change. And the way that we approach that is we'll typically start in the highest levels of the organization that we can get to. So typically with the CEO, we want to understand, to your point, Paul, what the longer term initiatives are of the business, and how AgentSync can tie into that, whether that has to do with growth, product lines, states, the expansion of distribution channels, whether that has to do with more kind of operations and IT and supporting, a big cloud data initiative as an example, and having sort of a centralized place, a source of truth, if you will, for the distribution channel that feeds everything else. And so we'll typically start with the CEO or COO, and then it's equally important that we get the perspective of the person who owns sales or the distribution of products and understand, what holdups or pauses are there on that agent journey that are slowing down ready to sell. And then ultimately we need to win the hearts and minds of the users. So we have this interesting opportunity, I'll call it, where the users of our product are typically on the lower levels of the organization, administrators, licensing managers, etc. Incredibly important individuals to the business, but not in the board meetings. And so how do you tie the value for this group to the value that the CEO sees for the organization? And that's our challenge, and one that we embrace every day. And it's really fun because of how much overlap this distribution channel management has across a lot of the initiatives in insurance. And so we do those things simultaneously. And we also bring in a lot of technical resources on our side to meet one-to-one with the CIO or the IT director who, to your point, is seeing 100 new products come across their desk every month, which might be exciting, but are also noisy. And how do you separate the noise from frequency? And we work really closely to understand what integration endpoints we need to execute successfully. We're really fortunate in that our product stack is built on Salesforce. So out of the box, we have like enterprise-ready security, API frameworks, all those boxes that you need to check to work with a business like NASA we're able to do. So it's a team selling approach that gets us to the end of the line with our customers, and has worked for us. We've been fortunate where we've never churned a customer in company history. Now we will someday, but we focus so much on the front end and matching the fit and making sure it works and scoping it the right way that when we ultimately go to implementation, it's always been a success so far, and it's not without hurdles and challenges that are unforeseen later. Those come, but that work is rewarded later with successful customer outcomes.
So talk to us a little bit about if you're going to build, and I'm sure you already have at AgentSync, but your dream basketball team, right? Using that analogy. So selling is a team sport. If you're going to build your dream team, and not necessarily the individuals, looking at character, looking at skill set, combination, because as we know, it's about what people can do, but it's also how they do it, right? Because if you were to walk in, or a sales individual were to walk in and it doesn't click, then that deal might not happen. So tell us a little about ideal dream team. You're going to walk in.
In terms of like characteristics of the makeup of that team?
Yeah.
Just to make sure, okay, because I immediately was thinking, okay, Larry Bird's my small forward. Who else do we have on this team? I think in terms of characteristics of what make a great go-to-market or sales team. And I'll talk about this maybe more in the lens of startups, since there's an audience here that is, startup founders that are in its founder-led sales, and they're thinking about making those first 5 sales hires. The things that I would recommend you look for, right off the bat, you're going to need somebody with a lot of what I like to kind of coin as intellectual curiosity. So this is somebody who's really curious and wants to learn. And we look for that pattern because one of the things I learn every day when I talk to customers is how every insurance business is different. Are there patterns? Yes, but you have to understand the nuances and quirks and complexities of customers, especially in the enterprise, if you want to stand out from the noise. And you have to be able to map business value to those like core elements of the business and their strategy and the makeup and the operations and IT of the whole organization to get the buy-in of the leadership team that ultimately has to sort of stamp it. So intellectual curiosity is a big one. There's this team player element. Sales has I think a bit of a connotation of a bit of a lone wolf thing where, there's people that are kind of out in the field making it happen. You don't hear from them often, but then, the results show up. We don't approach it that way at all. We see sales as something where you're a quarterback and you have to engage a ton of different players from both sides and synchronize those movements and introductions and that coordination really effectively. And that takes somebody who has a lot of humility to understand, like, there's other people that are better at these things than I am, and I need to put them in a position to succeed on the customer side and on our side as well. I think there's an element in a startup too of just sort of scrappiness, right? Willingness to sweep the sheds, chop wood, carry water, do the things that aren't pretty necessarily, but get things done. And I think that that's something that, you know, founders typically embody and should be able to just have that click with the person that they're working with, because in order to be a successful founder, you have to embody those character traits every day. So I would say if you're a founder out there, trust your gut on that element of just sort of humility and grit. Those would be the things that I would say I look for. You know, there's more to it, but ultimately, you know, I wouldn't pin that sort of competitive lone wolf profile as what you're trying to do. I would go much more for like the team player who's really smart and wants to learn and solve customer problems.
Yeah. No. I know one of the biggest objections I heard internally, you know, because you know we don't want to be driving the process. We kind of wanted to kind of make sure the discussions kept going. Was you know, it's expensive. We only have 2 or 3 people working full time on this. How do I justify the cost? I can't fire people. You know, I can't fire these people. I'm not going to, because they're doing other things. You're at a point in that organization now. There's a big mind shift somehow happened, and I don't know, you know, Robby, how close you were to this for our particular one. But how does that team that Laura just had you describe? How does that sort of how does it work together to change how people are looking at a solution?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, you know, almost all large software purchases for an enterprise involve some amount of this is being done manually by people today, and that is not scalable for one reason or another. And there's typically some type of compelling event that's tied to the urgency around taking a closer look at that manual process and asking ourselves, is there a better way that paves a more clear, more predictable path into the future? And I think the case, you know, with our conversations with Nassau had a lot to do with, yes, this is how it's happening today, and could we continue to do it this way? To some extent, probably. But as we look ahead to the future, you guys have really bold, ambitious goals from a growth perspective, from a customer perspective, from sort of an IT ops perspective, and how the business can run with more automation and predictability. And so we were focused a lot more, you know, not in 6 months, but in sort of 3-year, 5-year type of terms. And we see that as a pattern for the more kind of innovative customers that we work with, and we try to focus on that. The other thing that I think was really eye-opening for me just last week, we had our revenue kickoff for the year where everybody in the business got together, and we had 5 different customers dialed in to that sort of full day offsite that we did as a team. And we did 10-minute interviews with those customers. And you know, it was kind of a similar discussion around what was the world like before, and then what was the world like after AgentSync, and like paint the picture of that bridge. And so much of it was actually about the improvement of these people's lives that were operating on spreadsheets and sort of held to this standard as a licensing manager of like perfection is the expectation, and anything less is sort of inexcusable, right? It's, you think about your relationship with like IT or another back office administrative function, it really is that type of a scenario where you only hear about it if it's a problem. And that's a little bit of an unfair expectation to begin with, but you combine that with like the user experience being so clunky and so manual, and these sort of rote, monotonous tasks being dragged out over weeks or months in some case to get an agent onboarded. What you can do is repurpose that time and deploy it on much more strategic work. And it is a process to figure out what that strategic work is. And that's something we proactively do with our customers. But as you guys look ahead, you know, the goal is not to build a 20-person licensing organization to reach the scale and ambitions that Nassau has. It's to work on customer-facing problems and the things that are your secret sauce that you're great at. And an opportunity to fully automate a highly complex but required part of doing business, the insurance industry, is just kind of, you know, in our opinion, one of the steps you got to take along the journey. So I don't know if that was consistent with some of the things that you guys felt along the way, but that's the way we try to approach every customer experience.
Love it. And as we, you know, get towards the end of the conversation for today, I love to ask the why. Robby, you have an interesting background. You also have a podcast that you do, exploring stories as well. What is your why? What makes you wake up in the morning and say, this is what I'm going to do?
That's a really good question. And Laura, that's changed a lot for me over the past year because I just had my first son, my first kid, I should say.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thanks, Paul. I appreciate that. It was I underestimated how much my why was going to change when that happened. And so I would say first and foremost, my why is my family. And I think AgentSync is an amazing place and opportunity for me to provide the type of life for my family that I seek to provide. The second part of it is I'm a builder at heart. I've always been one of the first 100 employees at basically every company I've worked for, and I've gotten to grow with those companies to many thousands of employees. And I so enjoy the process of working collaboratively with customers and building solutions that unblock things for customers and then become repeatable, that unblock things for the market. And in order to do that, you have to be really focused on great people. And so one of the biggest parts of my job is recruiting and finding really talented people who are in comfortable positions in their life to do something different and maybe do something harder. And what is the incentive to do that? And so I would say that's another part of my why, is just the opportunity to build. And the third part maybe that I'd throw in there is coming from Silicon Valley. I grew up in the city of San Francisco in the Haight-Ashbury, if listeners have heard of that neighborhood. And it's kind of the mecca of tech, or considered to be that at least. One of the things that was always challenging recruiting and working in startups in San Francisco was there were 100 alternatives for every employee that was looking for their next thing. And so recruiting was actually really hard, and it was hard to stand out too amongst some of the massive titans of industry there. We relocated our company headquarters to Denver, Colorado, which is a burgeoning tech community. Awesome city with a great lifestyle, but we all of a sudden feel like we have an opportunity to be the biggest technology success story in Colorado state history, and we're on track to do that. It's still early and we've got a lot of work to do, but there's also an element too of building something really amazing locally here in Colorado that will create opportunities for years and years to come. And there will be founders who work at AgentSync, and it'll be a Cambrian explosion of founders going and doing other things, in 10 years when this journey comes to an end. So, it's hard to think that far in advance when you work in a company, but that is one more why, I guess, to give you one extra one, Laura, there.
Well, that's great. Listen, Robby, thanks for joining us. What's the best way for people to connect with you directly, and then how do they find AgentSync?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, linkedin.com/Robby Allen, ROBBYALLEN. I'm also on Twitter at Robby Allen. And then if you guys want to learn more about AgentSync, you can either drop me a line on LinkedIn or just go to our website, agentsync.io. We've got a ton of really amazing products on there, broker-facing products purpose-built for carriers, MGAs, and agencies. And we'd love to hear from you in general and just get to know your company and some of the challenges and things you're working on. So that's the best way to get in touch with me. Now, Paul and Laura, I'll have to turn it back to you. Does the story have a happy ending? And if so, what is its conclusion?
Oh, you're there. You're like you're just in the cleanup stages here. So your team's excited to work with your company. We're excited about the possibilities of what you can do for us this year. And we'll do a follow up in a year. We can bring some of our operations people on and they can talk about what the world was before and after. I think that would be a nice follow up.
That sounds great, Paul.
Yeah, excellent. All right. Thanks for listening, Laura. Thank you. And Robby, and tune in again next week for another episode of the Reimagine Podcast. Thanks.